This podcast is also available via StageLink.com, the groundbreaking new platform for live performing arts. Please support the podcast by liking, subscribing, commenting, and tagging the podcast. It helps us to continue to bring the industry high-level content. I'm your host, Shanae Stiletto, and my guest on today's Circuspreneur Podcast is writer, director, and clown documentarian Guilford Adams. Welcome to the podcast, Guilford. How are you?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much. I'm great.
Oh, it's absolutely a pleasure. And I want to let listeners know a little bit about you and your amazing film. American Clown is a feature length documentary exploring the plight of clowns in a country that looks on them with a growing sense of apprehension and disdain. Guest appearances include John C. Reilly, Steve-O, David Arquette, and Matt Morgan. Guilford Adams has worked as a professional clown for nearly 2 decades. In recent years, he's watched media reports of clowns terrorizing neighborhood streets at night, the reboot of It and Pennywise, the shuttering of Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus, and the unceremonious end to the regional Ronald McDonald program, where assistants to Ronald appeared at grand openings, community events, and elementary school shows. Guilford was one of those dismissed assistants to Ronald. As he felt the culture shifting, he started thinking about what it might mean for him, his family, and all of his clowning comrades. The film follows Guilford's quest as he surveys the current state of clowning with his friends who are also struggling to adapt, as well as legendary performers of past eras and their take on the history and art of clowning. American Clown premieres today at the Chinese Theater in the Los Angeles Dances with Films Festival. Again, amazing. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, Guilford. This is an exceptional documentary. I mean, it just feels like such an amazing gift for the circus community and for the clowning community. I can't say enough about, in terms of like advocacy. And I think the times that we're into where we see, clowning usually the brunt of jokes, I think in mostly negative ways, the circus arts too, used in ways sometimes that I don't feel are super respectful and trying to get folks to change the narrative around that. And then also too, just honoring the, I think in some ways dying art of traditional clowning, where there are many spaces where they won't even use the term clowning anymore, which I think is really fascinating and something that I don't want to see go. I want folks to continue to honor and use that word, and that that title that's so important to so many folks that exist in this industry and have existed in it for so long. So could you please go into what inspired American Clown and why you feel like it was important to continue to advocate for the art of clowning, and then, include so many amazing folks in this documentary that I think some people will be surprised to see who went to clown college and, who has this, interesting background, that might not be necessarily associated with folks that you see kind of in like comedy now or stand up or, kind of any of those offshoots, of this art form.
Sure. Yeah. I got into this. I've been a clown in Los Angeles and even before that for 25, 30 years. I had my first dabble with it when I was in junior high, and I learned how to do animal balloons and some magic and stuff, and went to a nursing home where my mom basically propositioned a show at a free auction. And so I gave kind of a free show. And then I kind of left it and I got into sports. So I came into kind of acting as an athletic sort of thing. I was a springboard diver. And I did that in college, and I enjoyed being, it was collegiate, and enjoyed being around the swimmers and all that stuff. But, they were a little jocular for me, and it just didn't quite feel like my tribe, even though we looked similar and, we had similar tastes and stuff. And I got into an acting class, and that acting class, it just opened my eyes to everything. And so when I transferred from Tennessee, because I was a diver on the University of Tennessee volunteer team, I transferred to Texas, and I went to Texas. I didn't have a lot to go on as an actor here. I wanted to be an actor. I've been an athlete basically my whole my young adult life at that point, and I just didn't know what to do. So I led with my best foot forward, and that was being physical and being like tumbler and flips and all that sort of stuff, because I didn't go to high school doing musicals. And so I didn't really have the ability to compete with the others that did do that. But I could tumble and I could take pratfalls and stuff. So I naturally kind of refound clowning in a way that I had left it in junior high. And when I moved out to LA, I was lucky enough to be able to move here, right? And then to try to create a career. And I was always told to have my weeks free for auditions. And so I did do that to have them free as before self tapes just kind of took over the world. And so I worked on the weekends doing party stuff for other people. And after doing that for 6 months, like I saw the money change hands and I thought, well, I want this money. I'm taking out these middleman fees. And so I started my own company. And this was like back when they had yellow pages, believe it or not. So I was Clowns for a Hire, and it didn't. And then I wanted to get on the internet, but somebody had clownsforhire.com, and he wouldn't let me put my name up there because it was the name of the database. And so he kind of talked to me. He's like, he was sympathetic, and he was like, "Listen, why don't you're in Los Angeles? Why don't you be like Los Angeles Clown or something?" And then I Googled that name. The domain wasn't taken in 2003. So that's how I kind of started the company. And because of that name and because of the sort of, we're in a large, sprawling, I live in Southern California metropolis area, I was able to learn a lot about clowning and shows and work as a kid's clown. And then that led to opportunities and jobs because people would be looking for a clown, or productions would be looking for a clown. And so I've done 4,000 kids parties over the past 20 years, and I started booking commercials and TV shows and all that sort of stuff. So I really kind of learned, like it was always on the job training. I did audition for Ringling Brothers in '97. I didn't follow through with that sort of audition. I didn't do the paperwork, and there's a big entry. It's like a gigantic form that you have to fill out an application. And I was like, oh no, they should just see me for who I am. And I was above it. And so I didn't get in that year. And consequentially, it was the last year that school existed.
Yeah.
And so that school closed for everybody, but I did end up meeting a lot of those people that went into the '97 school, including Steve-O and my friend Matt Morgan and people that I've become allied to since then. But that was kind of the beginning of this sort of career that I've had as a clown. And then in about 2008, 2007, I was approached by somebody via online that was looking for a clown. And it was going to be a position for a clown with benefits. Now, I didn't know many
Oh,
clowns that have benefits. So I did some Googling and I thought, like, I think this is for kind of like working with Ronald McDonald, or at the time, I like, this is
mhm.
McDonald's that's calling me. And I had another friend that was being approached at the same time, my friend Laffy Pants, who's in the documentary. And we both got the job. He got the full-time position. I got the part-time position of being an assistant to Ronald. And at that time, we did that job for 10 years between the two of us, both of us. And I still maintained my clown stuff. I still worked as an actor here and there. I still booked jobs as a clown. But then it was around 2017, and kind of to your opening sort of salvo that there everything started shutting down. Was like coming out the rebooting of it, and there was like all these Toms, which is what we called each other in the Ronald program. You call each other top of the market, the acronym for, because you can't say I'm Ronald because there's only one Ronald, and then
Mm.
so we're an assistant to Ronald. And um and um and so it really started everything. So I lost that job. We all lost that job eventually. It started off kind of in the East. People were losing jobs, and then Southern California lost their jobs at the end of the year. And I thought, this is a real crisis right now for clowns. Ringling Brothers closed their doors. Big Apple Circus closed their doors. And I thought, this is weird. Like, what's going on? It was right at the beginning of a presidential election. And
Mm.
the news cycle had gotten very entertainment biased, and so there was just a bunch of sort of like events that were kind of all affecting one another. But the end result was the clowns are going away, the way that we knew them, and the
Mhm.
horror clown was kind of coming to replace it. So I thought, this is the start of the documentary. We need to talk about this and kind of what's happening, and that was kind of that's where we are. And 8 years later, the documentary is now finally premiering tonight.
Wow. And I think the relevance, because we saw that happening in 2017, and then the pandemic happened shortly after that. And this past 5 years, we've seen it again. Cirque went bankrupt and went away. Ringling has come back and struggled to rebrand, and figure out kind of what their new mission is in terms of moving forward as a modern circus. And so much of the industry has not recovered. Somebody was talking to me the other day and saying, "Oh God, your industry is like really bounced back and things are going so great." And I said, "I guess if you're on the outside looking in, not to complain, but for all intents and purposes, our industry has been through a lot. I mean, we had the crash in '08, which really affected all of us. Those of us that were based in LA, have been based in LA for years. Now I'm based in Las Vegas, going back and forth. But when you're inside of that and you see these different pockets of what is on the outside, what's happening in the world that affects our industry so deeply, and taking out two major companies or taking out three major companies, how does that affect like our work environment? I've loved like seeing your interviews, Guilford, of you discussing about the impacts of the industry, how there's no pipeline to getting a degree for clowning or for circus arts. What do you do when you had a great job that offered you benefits, with most of us being independent contractors, whether you're a clown or you're a different type of circus worker, and maybe not having those employee benefits, and how important that is when there, are a few companies that are offering that, with folks thinking, oh, there's just like work everywhere. It's like, well, what kind of work is there, right? Like you have to understand what somebody's up against. If they have a certain type of position, are they getting those same benefits? And how quickly we kind of lose out when things are not really going well in the world. And then also too, how you were talking about like society kind of taking over the narrative of clowning, and kind of making horror this really big aspect of clowning as well, which I've thought that for years, and discussing that within the environment of like, do we have control over this medium anymore? And, how do we get control back over our medium, that I feel in some ways has kind of been, outsourced or maybe co-opted, either commercially or, corporatized, which that's not all bad, because, that means again, you get health insurance and you get things of that nature. There's like good and bad with all of these things, outside of the traditional, Ringling Brothers, traveling around with the circus, or working with a circus that maybe can't offer you all those things but is like going to staunchly help you to have a really good and viable career. So what is your perspective on the current state of things now, Guilford, when you're having conversations about folks and their reflections on your documentary, and how they are able to see more inside of the industry and more toward, to the history of clowning and where it comes from, and also too with folks kind of changing the narrative around that. And I feel like this is a really good documentary to get a hold of our narrative. Again, you talk about so many different facets, especially facets we talk on the podcast about circus workers' rights, about clowning rights, and the rights to, again, have access to your industry, to have some economic rights here. And then again, dealing with the fluctuations of society, which, can really negatively impact your career. Do you go down that road of honoring where the industry is going? Or do you stay true to the traditional aspects of a medium that you fell in love with? What is evolution, I would say, because some people are traditionalists, some people are evolutionists, some people are modernists when it comes to circus, and everyone kind of has their own perspective on it. But I know sometimes it feels like, we discuss how, social media has really taken over circus, in a lot of ways, where if you don't have this type of presence, all of a sudden, are you going to be a working circus performer anymore? And there's folks that maybe have been around for 20, 30 years that either have gone and been able to capitalize on that, or because they had such a great career prior to social media, it didn't hurt them in the exact same ways. Do you see all of those different themes kind of encompassed in the American clown?
Well, it's a lot to unpack. Yeah, I think there is. Uh,
We only
there,
got 30 minutes.
I know. I'll try to attack one by one. I do think that there is a shift, right? There's a shift, like a lot of professions, that we have moved from the corporate embrace of a lot of this stuff, for better or worse, to kind of more gig economy type stuff. So I think there's there, and that's prevalent in a lot of industries, and clowning is no exception, as well as others.
Mhm.
I think we definitely have that challenge. I In maybe the days of that sort of corporate clown or the ability to get health benefits. I mean, Cirque will continue to do it, but maybe a lot of people can't. I mean, even back in the day, Ringling Brothers was not paying clowns like anything worthy of what they should be earning, much less benefits. Um, that will be continue to be a challenge. As far as clowning in the word of it, yeah, things are changing, right? The sort of traditional painted clown, it's being a little bit hijacked by a lot of horror genres and that sort of stuff, and so it's getting more difficult to kind of get our message across. Um, the biggest challenge, I think personally, is the fact when I just did a clown party earlier today, and it didn't happen today, but it often happens. Kids will ask me, "Aren't all clowns scary?" And and I'll have a way of bridging out of that and say something like, "Oh, you're talking about my cousin Pennywise. He's gone Hollywood or whatever," just to kind of move the conversation. And I also like us all being in the same family. I think that's kind of fun, because that's part of the lore of a clown, right? We don't eat, we're asexual, we're all related somehow, there's like one big happy family. But I think there is a danger for a lot of these kids when they ask that question, and the danger for us is they don't have exposure to anyone else but the horror clowns. That's all they see. Ringling Brothers is back, but they don't have clowns in the same way that they did. They have it a little more Cirque style or sporty, or they just kind of specialize. So I think what we have to do when the market is being dominated by a lot of horror type clown stuff, and we live in a very cinematic culture, which I think assumes that everything is like that. We have to work extra hard to create some positive presentations. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with American Clown. David Arquette, who's in it as well, that's what he's trying to do with Bozo right now. I think people would argue. I think some traditionalists would say, "Hey, I don't love what David's doing with Bozo." I'm not sure. That's not what I'm saying. I've heard some chatter. I think he's that sometimes maybe it takes a unique individual and that has some recognition to kind of to help evolve the clown to make it more palatable for today's generation. So I'm not saying that I think it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's different and I recognize it as such. We have a lot of work cut out for us. And we also have to understand that, like, this is in the same way that stand-up comedians, belabor being politically correct and doing all this. These are the unique challenges we have as a society that continues to evolve. And these are some other sort of like areas that we can say can be confusing and perplexing, but they're also challenges, and challenges typically for a clown are opportunities. So I'm more sort of optimistic about where this could go in the future as opposed to being pessimistic. I think it's ripe for opportunities for people that are really passionate about doing it, that they can continue to tell their stories.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. And I'm optimistic like you too, Guilford, because, again, like people can get a little upset or, get triggered or things like that. But I think it's, again, being part of the solution. And American Clown is, to me, a representation of what are the solutions, to all of these things. And you have such a, I think, diverse representation of clowning as well within the documentary. I have not seen it. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. But from everything I've looked up, you have such a great perspective and getting so many different voices involved because there's so many unique voices involved in clowning and involved in the circus arts and so many folks that actually have really amazing solutions. I like seeing the collective get together and work together and support one another in trying to push for those ideas and again taking control of that narrative. It's so great that you have David in there. You also have Steve-O, which every time I tell people that Steve-O went to clown college, they're like, get out. No. There's no way. Went to clown college and things like that too. So it's always like bridging those gaps with, even like the new like generation. Sometimes like they just don't know. And when you remind them, they're like, wow, that totally makes me look at this medium very, very differently. I didn't know that you could have used that to harness to get to somewhere else. Which again, the diversification of our environment, of the performing arts, of the circus arts, of clowning is so magnificent. And it can be a launching pad onto something else, just like it's launched you into so many different directions. You started out acting and then it took you into so many different spaces. I mean, you've had an amazing career for the last 20 years. And I think the important thing is showing folks that we are an industry. And I love that you were saying that in the space of all the industries that people normally think about. You have to put us in that class as well. Like we are not just this random community that, doesn't really know how to coordinate with one another. We're very coordinated. People are very intelligent, they're very decisive. They have these really rich backgrounds that inform the art that they're doing. And they have lives, they have families, they have children. They have all these things that they're operating and doing just like any other industry. We said that a lot at the White House last year. When we were there, we asked them, like, can you stop calling all these things that don't work politically a circus? Because we work actually pretty exceptionally well. And I think you'll probably be able to see that in American circus, an American clown, I'm sorry, with that can maybe be part two. Because I love that you did American clown. Maybe you can do American circus and then you can include like, you know, all the other mediums too and incorporate that because I think it's so important to have this platform and to have folks see behind the curtain and behind the makeup, behind the mask, to see the humanity of how we all exist here, as employed people that are all, again, trying to navigate how things apply to us and how things are, constantly evolving and shifting. How important it was for you to, Guilford, to have that type of representation inside of the documentary. And again, what was your end game with the documentary in leveraging it, and harnessing it, in the wider audience? What I have said as well is that what we need in the circus is to get out of our community because we all function so well within our industry, in our community, but opening up the audience and the fans to be more involved in who we are, I think is really important in this day and age. I see that as like the evolution where it's like we've kind of all done what we can do. And now it's like, who has that influence that can highlight and help us to harness these messages that we're trying to bring on home? For us, it's been getting, very advocacy driven, speaking a lot in DC and trying to bring these things to light in terms of like maybe like into potential policy recognition, and gaining some rights over that where you can say, okay, if that's happening within the circus arts, this particular space is not allowed to do that, right? Because we're going to try to protect it for the industry in the way that it exists now, or at least give the industry a right to say something because it affects us so much and we're not always involved in the conversation. So I see your documentary as a way for folks to be a part of the conversation, which rightfully so, because you're the ones that are making it happen and the ones that are, giving so much of your energy and your life to this art form. So I really see it as a great way to have a serious conversation reflected through a lot of, I think, schools of thought with everyone that you have inside of it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I echo your sentiment about going to DC to talk about sort of like, hey, can we be careful with the language, please? You know, because I feel that way about clowns a lot. Like everyone's always look at this clown. It's like, listen, I'm not watching them juggle or do some awesome skill thing here. I don't really need you to kind of use our word to on them. Like this is not very entertaining for me, frankly. I understand what you're saying, but isn't there like another word for it? Um,
Not
so
us.
that's frustrating for me, and I want to take the word back. It almost feels to me like it's like has clown been so vacant that you can use this word willy nilly without anyone really saying anything. That's part of the reason why we did this documentary at the beginning was I don't know if you remember in Vegas, but it was happening. It was like in 2016. There was all these news reports of scary clowns are coming to Southern California, and I remember seeing all this stuff and thinking like any kid with like extra allowance would now go get this mask or whatever and be a scary clown at a park. And it made me really kind of angry that like news organizations would use this as kind of a cudgel to drum up sort of like irritation, whatever else. And it was like for kids that aren't clowns, they have a latex mask, and it felt very like, you know, like we were disposable. And I guess, and that's kind of what started my sort of the anger with like kind of getting into this. Like, wait a second. And they would, these same news organizations, they would call me because my name is easily Googleable, or, Los Angeles Clown Company. And they would say like, hey, would you come up and talk about this, how these scary clowns are taking your jobs? And I remember at the time I was like, okay, so you want me to come up in costume, right? And like, oh yeah, in costume for sure. Like, okay, in costume, and tell you everybody cry, will you cry, and about how these things are taking after you've created this story that now affects my livelihood. And the whole thing is not paid. Am I correct? And we can't pay. It's like, okay, yeah, no, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no on that. I was so confused by it. And one more finer point that I thought, and I didn't explain this to them, but you using those words and using that vernacular and saying those are clowns, it really, I, I I understand that this is entertainment. This is not news. This is entertainment. Because if this were flipped and this said like, hey, a cop is pulling people over in Glendale, but it was actually a guy dressed like a cop pulling people over in Glendale, you would say a guy dressed like a cop is pulling people over in Glendale. You wouldn't say a cop is pulling people over in Glendale, because that gives a misrepresentation. People think like, oh, gee, cops are going wild. So I think words matter. Words matter. And we need to be accountable for those words. And we live in a society right now where words don't have a lot of weight, and people can say whatever they want. And I think that's dangerous. And I think, and not only can they say whatever they want, but they can continue to lie, and we give them more of a platform. And we need to look at that. Like, why are we doing that? And we're trying to silence the truth tellers. We're trying to elevate the liars and silence the truth tellers. I think we should look at that.
Yes, I also think that we should look at that very, very deeply. And as much as it continues to get out of hand, I just love that you said that it would be, a man impersonating a cop, but it's never a man impersonating a clown
Right.
or a
Right.
woman impersonating
A clown. Yeah. Yeah.
a clown. Well,
I
yeah, I mean, and that's why we need the box, that's why we're missing the box to check off when it comes to important things like that. And again, changing people's perception of the idea of running away with the circus, that this is not just your hobby. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that comes up of people saying, hey, is this your main thing? Is
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is this your main gig? I mean, you don't do something else on the side, or you don't do something else to like project yourself in the world, or to like really take care of yourself. And when you're speaking to people where decades long this has been their whole career and their whole life, and how much energy and effort it takes to sustain this livelihood. And that's what we end up speaking to the new generation about, which they can do so many more things than we even could when we started out. And I'm still really young too, but it's like there are so many more mediums to get you there, but how do they sustain you there? And that's one of the things that I've seen so much about the difference for this generation. You can maybe get a lot of different platforms and things like that to elevate you, but the consistency of your career, and do you know how to take care of yourself when there's a downswing, when there's a downshift, or when things are not necessarily on your side, and not really going that well for you as an industry, because it's also interconnected and interdependent. I wanted to ask you, Guilford, as closing for the last minute or so, what do you want audiences to take away from American Clown? Again, what does it mean for you to finish this film after 8 years of working on it? I know that it was just a labor of love, and having your community all just come together to produce this art, which makes so many important points, and I think will bring people to so many different conclusions about clowning and about how it exists within the circus arts, and again, bridging those gaps between the old and the new, and kind of like where we see the future of clowning going.
I think a lot of people just don't know what it takes to be a clown. And so what I've done in my
Mm.
small way is just try to put my clown foot forward, my clown shoe forward and try to have this discussion a little bit further. I'm sure there'll be people that will be like, oh, well, he doesn't speak for me and all that stuff. Listen, I'm just trying to continue the conversation. I'm happy for other people to join in and to tell me what their feelings are about this. I think we all work better when we work together. And I think right now, and I will say this, I think sharks have better PR people than clowns, you know, um, because clowns just can't seem to get it together. Like we're tripping over each other and we're talking about the devastation of our profession. And so we need to work together to try to like portray some positive sort of some positive clowns. I mean that's basically it. We're not going to get rid of the horror clown. The horror clown is here to stay. He makes them money. So we have to double our efforts to bring some positivity to clowning. And that horror clown can stay. Who cares? But we deserve a seat at the table as well.
Wonderful. And where can we find more information about American Clown that is premiering today, Guilford?
Absolutely. So Dances with Films, it's online, American Clown movie. You can also go to danceswithfilms.com. And American Clown is premiering tonight in 5.5 hours at 7 p.m. in Hollywood. So please come out if you have the night free. It's a dark night for theater. So, if you're a theater artist, come on out and support.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Guilford, for taking the time to come on the podcast. You have such a big day today. I'm just so grateful for all the work that you did in getting American Clown out there and for speaking for the circus arts community in a positive way and, highlighting us and getting so many people involved, to support the industry as well. I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait for our industry and our community to see it and to support it and to uplift it as well. And I want to leave listeners with this Circuspreneur podcast is also available on stagelink.com, StageLync.com, the groundbreaking new platform for live performing arts that provides unmatched access and connection to this vibrant world of shows and entertainment. If you're a professional in the performing arts, visit stagelink.com/pro, StageLyncPro, offers industry professionals higher visibility, networking opportunities, and tools to support and enhance their careers. Until next time, everyone, I'm your host, Shanae Stiletto. Thank you for tuning in. Please look forward to the next Circuspreneur podcast. And thank you again to our special guest, Guilford Adams.
Thank you, Shanae. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.